For the latest in strategic affairs, subscribe to our YouTube channel. Click the bell icon for updates.
This is StratNews Global. I'm Amitabh Revi. On Talking Point this week, we're looking at the G20 Summit with Ambassador Pankaj Saran, India's former Deputy National Security Advisor, a member of the NSAB. He's been India's envoy to Russia. And when he was Joint Secretary PMO, he was the Prime Minister's points person for the first 6 G20 summits. Ambassador Saran, thanks so much for your time again. We're becoming like bad pennies. We appear on your doorstep every week, I think.
No, it's a pleasure. Pleasure to see
Ambassador,
you.
just talking about the G20, but crucial bilateral summits, meetings that took place, including the Xi-Biden 3-hour one. How do you read that meeting in terms of the changing global order?
Yeah. Firstly, thank you, Amitabh, for this interview. I think that meeting probably was the high point of the summit because of many reasons. They have been meeting in the past. They met in 2021. They met earlier in 2022, but it was virtual. Yeah. This was a face-to-face.
I think the last one was Davos.
Yeah, that's right. Correct. So, but this was a long 3-hour, but the readouts of both sides are very interesting. So in my opinion, this meeting actually marked the high point of the summit. And in some ways, it symbolized the recognition by the United States of the emergence of a bipolar world. And the admission of the fact that we are heading towards some kind of bipolarity was also contained in the US National Security Strategy, which talked so much about China. And if you read the readouts of this meeting, the American side is actually saying we will open the channels of communication. We will try to establish the rules of the road with regard to our engagement with China. They're also saying we do not want to enter into a Cold War and that we want to manage the competition. On the other hand, the Chinese are also quoting what Biden said, basically to the effect that there will be no Cold War, that China will not be contained, that China's economic development will not be restrained. I think it's very interesting that the two leaders are meeting almost on equal terms. So that's actually very interesting.
When you say almost on equal terms, you're talking about bipolarity, G2, which was floated a while back. The implications for India, Ambassador, I mean, there's always this possibility, like you're saying, that this develops further into some kind of a reset of US-China relations. How does that affect us, the dynamics then?
No, it's critical for us. I mean, firstly, I would probably use the word not reset, maybe it's too strong.
Yeah.
But I would probably go by the word thaw. It's a thaw in the relationship because of the frequent meetings between the two and the length of the meetings and the range of issues being discussed. For us, we have to be careful about which way the US-China dynamic goes. They've come a long way in the relative power strengths since the last financial crisis took place in 2008 when the G20 began. So if you look at the 14-year period, the only economy in the world which has actually benefited from the current international economic order is China. Its GDP has quadrupled from what it was in 2008. No other economy, major economy in the world has witnessed such exponential growth. And I think the fact today that they are talking about managing not just the economic order, but the political and strategic order, I think we have to read the signals. And this implies that how, on the one hand, you have the geostrategic competition or the contestation in the Indo-Pacific, etc. But on the other hand, this is also a reality where they have actually said there will be no decoupling, that they will continue to cooperate in terms of economic and other issues such as climate, such as maybe pandemics, etc. So it's not a black and white world for us, and we have to understand that. And with the relative decline of Russia, the scenario is going to change. And as I see it, China's rise is only going to be greater, not lesser. And the gap between Chinese power and American power is going to reduce. So it is going to impact us because of the simple reason that China is on our doorstep. We share this border, which is unsettled. We have serious difficulties and problems with China. So anything which China does bilaterally with us obviously is going to impact us, but also how America and the Western world as a whole, including Europe, deals with China. And do they contribute to the further strengthening of China, which will impact us? Do they, how will they manage the rise of China is the most important issue for us.
Just taking up from those last points that you made in terms of India and China, again, first in-person meeting between Prime Minister Modi and Xi Jinping since the Galwan clashes. How do you see the India-China dynamic?
Again, it's interesting. I mean, the official Indian position is that we cannot go back to normal unless China retraces all the things it did in 2020. I mean, that's the position, and that's a perfectly valid position, that you cannot pretend as if 2020 didn't happen. But on the other hand, the fact is that your trade with China is increasing. Your kind of balance of trade is getting more and more adverse against you. China is, dealing with all the Southeast Asian countries. So I think it's good that there was a handshake. I don't think there was a very substantive meeting.
Yeah.
But in 2023, theoretically, the Chinese president should be visiting India at least twice. Once for the SCO summit and again for the G20 summit. And as a host, I don't see how India cannot have a bilateral meeting with President Xi Jinping. So it's early days, but the fact is that there was a handshake, there was a meeting, and of course, how this pans out will depend a lot on Chinese behavior on the ground. That is really the bottom line. It's not what they say, it's what they do.
India played a big role, Ambassador, in getting all G20 countries to kind of agree to the communique. How do you analyze the wordings of the communique? Prime Minister Modi's "this is not an era of war" made it into that. Macron later, I think he tweeted talking about China and mediation. How do you see that?
Well, obviously, as far as the Western world is concerned, Ukraine was on the top of their agenda, and which is why the president of Russia did not attend. I think if you look at the paras, the relevant paras of the communique, they're very interesting. It indicates that a lot of hard negotiation was done on what exactly to say about Russia. I think, number one, India played a key role in trying to bridge the gap between the West and the rest. Number two, I think the global South actually stood up together. Indonesia, India, Brazil, South Africa, plus others. So this is it's a big change where the global South has stood up like this. And number three, I think apart from the Ukraine issue, you can read in the communique that there is a more of a developing country perspective on the global economic and other issues that the G20 has discussed. But yes, I think that the Prime Minister's call that this is not the era of war has featured, and this call has been made to all sides of the conflict, not just to Russia. It's addressed equally to Ukraine, to Europe, to the United States. And so I think we should be, it is actually quite something for India to have played this role and for its voice to have been heard in the negotiating process. So I think it speaks of a certain positioning of India in the global architecture, in the global strategic architecture, And in my opinion, this role of India is going to only grow as the tensions and divisions in the world grow, because we have the ability and the will and the capability to function as a bridge between opposing sides, because frankly, no one wants a Cold War.
Could you talk a little bit more about President Putin's absence from this particular summit? Of course, Sergei Lavrov was there. I think he left a day early. He sat through Zelensky's virtual address this time. I think some other meetings he'd walked out of. Do you see Russia as the elephant in the room?
No, it was to some extent. I mean, insofar as the West is concerned, it was the missing character. And I think all sides knew. I mean, Putin knew he would not attend, but he was invited. The Western countries were perfectly happy that he was not present. So, yes, his absence was not very surprising, actually. And so, I mean, that's okay. I mean, I don't think it was a surprise for anyone.
Just going to take a question from one of our viewers, Ambassador Jaideep Gadavi, who says, would India be expecting much stronger engagement from Russia in the G20 than Bali? Russia might see the SCO as more interest-friendly path forward than the G20. And he goes on to add, would it be too much wishful thinking of a Biden-Putin bilateral in November 2023?
Firstly, it's a good question. I think historically, since the establishment of the G20 at the leaders level in 2008, the fact is that Russia systemically, as an economic power, has not been a big player in the G20. That's, that's a fact. So systemically, they are not significant when it comes to the global economy. I'm not talking about commodities, but I'm talking in terms of the global financial trade flows, etc. So that's insofar as the role in the G20 is concerned. I mean, there are far more powerful economies out there. Number one. And number two, I would also like to use this opportunity to talk about how, if we compare 2008, when it began, and this year, we find a big difference. 2008 marked, in some sense, with the collapse of Lehman Brothers, a collapse virtually of the Western capitalist economic and financial system. Today, what we are seeing is, despite all the paragraphs in the declaration, the international economic, financial, trade, and investment flows and technology have actually been weaponized by all sides, by the West and by Russia. And again, as in 2008, as we were victims at that time for the follies of New York and Lehman Brothers and the Western capitalist system, again, the global South is a victim of this weaponization of exactly the issues being discussed in the G20. So there is a big difference and a gap between what they say and what they write in the declaration and their actions in real life. So that's really the first point. Secondly, on the SCO and Russia's role, I don't think the SCO is a robust economic platform in any case. I mean, it's a very different kind of an economic model of cooperation, and it will continue like that because, firstly, it is not free market. It is not. It doesn't follow the principles which the G20 economies follow. Insofar as a bilateral between Putin and Biden, let's see. It's early days, but whenever it happens, that will be the best solution for resolving the Ukrainian conflict. A meeting between the two leaders. After all, they met last year in Geneva. So a bilateral, direct, face-to-face between these two leaders is probably the best and only way to shut this whole conflagration down.
There was a potential hiccup that was avoided in G20 when there was news of some kind of missile strikes in Poland, and there was consultation among the NATO leaders in Bali, and there's talk of Article 4 being invoked by Poland. And subsequently, that narrative was corrected. I think the first person to do that was Biden himself, who alluded to it possibly being Ukrainian missiles. And it turned out, investigations are still on, but it's probably the S-300s that they were using to defend against Russian incoming missiles.
No, I'm glad that the clarification was issued, and it was issued very quickly, because unfortunately we have seen in the last 8-9 months that apart from whatever is happening on the ground, the overhang and the kind of narratives which are flowing and the accusations back and forth, they're alarming, and they are misleading, and they could lead to unintended consequences. So it's absolutely essential that people are honest and transparent about what they say and how they act. It really, for countries like India and the global south, it is really too much to take every day that you have these accusations. And I'm glad actually that this clarification was made.
As you pointed out, India will have some tough navigating to do in at least the year to come when you're the president of G20. Indonesia must be heaving a sigh of relief. But a lot is planned. I think over 200 meetings all across India. There's even G20 and other envoys will be taken to the Andaman and Nicobar Islands. How do you see, of course, it depends on a lot of things happening or not happening outside India, but how do you see India navigating this tough times?
Yeah, no, look, when the G20 began at this level in 2008, we never imagined that there would come a day when India would actually host the G20. Because, I was there in those days, 2008, 9, 10, etc. I mean, they were held only in developed capitals, in Washington and Paris and London and so on. So we never thought that one day India would host. So I think it's a great opportunity for India. It's a great sign of India's recognition and its capacity to host. It's a recognition, I think, of our economic success, and not just success, but the future potential for growth of the Indian economy in the next few years. And it's a great opportunity for us to showcase what India is all about. And apart from the 20 countries, they're going to invite 9 other countries and so many other organizations. So it is going to be quite a year for India. And this decision to decentralize the meetings is really good, because you kill many birds with one stone. Number one, you make it an inclusive affair. You involve the states, the local regions. And then on top of that, you show to the rest of the world the diversity and the strength of India. So from both points of view, and you give a fillip to the local economies, to the local infrastructure. So there is so much that can come out of this. But most importantly, I think, is the fact that India can play not just being a good host, but also showcase its own massive successes in certain sectors of economic transformation that has actually taken place in the last few years. I mean, there are so many of them, and some of them have been revolutionary. We can discuss all that, but like, say, the India stack or the digital revolution, I mean, or the way we handle the vaccinations, direct benefit, there's so many of them. So if 1.4 billion people can be transformed within a democratic framework in a period of time like this, and still aspire to have a growth rate of 7% and to reach to probably double your GDP in the next 4 or 5 years, there are not many examples like this. I mean, so I think it's going to be it's actually a great opportunity.
Digitization, I think lots of countries are invoking interest in India's platforms, and Philippines and in Africa as well. So
right, no, the India stack, if you study it, it's the only kind in the world, because it's a layered. It started from the Aadhaar, and then it built up one layer after another, and today you are leveraging the data that you have, the digital platforms that you have, and you have actually been able to succeed in overcoming the digital divide. So I think it's a huge success.
And I think we're working on customizing it for any country who's interested to their requirements.
There's a lot of interest.
You mentioned that Putin-Biden meeting would probably be crucial in terms of a solution. There was just one question, I think, from Matara, which you'd answered. Is there any possibility of a ceasefire between Russia and Ukraine in the next few months? Do you see any signs of that winter
It's possible.
pressure on Zelensky?
I mean, it's possible. Who knows? The point is that either this could go on like this for months, or better sense could prevail. Because I have been saying from day one, everyone knows the solution. It's not as if people don't know what the problem is, what is the root of the problem, and what is the kind of solution that is possible. It's just that people seem to be waiting either for the right time or for some trigger or a tipping point, as I have said before, where you sit down and resolve it. It's very clear what the issues are, what kind of solutions are required, and who are the persons and the characters who can actually provide the solutions. They're all known.
I just want to go back to one of the thoughts that you alluded to or talked about earlier about India in the G20. How much of a difference it came suddenly, I think, in 2008, the invitation. If you could just talk about the evolution since you were there for the first six.
Yeah,
G20
those were very interesting times for us, because 2008 was also the Mumbai terror attack in November. And the crisis broke out, of course, towards the end of 2007, but it kind of galloped into much worse through the course of 2008. And of course, the Lehman Brothers collapse was the most iconic collapse of that period. So it was President George W. Bush and the Saudi king who actually approached India and said, look, we want to escalate the G20 from ministers to leaders. And India was invited. And I remember the Prime Minister at that time flew to Washington at very short notice. And the first meeting was held in November in Washington. And that was also an election year in the United States. Barack Obama was at the peak of his popularity. His primary agenda was to fix the American social, health, education, economy, etc. But when he took office in January 2009, he landed in a first-class crisis. And I don't envy him, because he became the president at a time when everything was in tatters. So there were two summits in 2009 in quick succession. There were two summits in 2010 in quick succession. At that time, the question was of the credibility of the economic system, the whole concept of toxic assets, the whole question of financial resilience, of financial oversight. The IMF had failed. There was huge pressure to reform the IMF. I mean, there was a huge crisis of confidence. I mean, the capital flows were disrupted. There was mayhem in the stock markets globally. Luckily for India, the contagion did not spread as much as we had feared it would. It happened a little later, but in 2009-10, we were relatively less affected. So the G20's leaders' focus was very sharp. It was an immediate recovery. It was like a response to a crisis. And over time, of course, I think that the G20 agenda has actually got very dispersed. So today in this Bali, for example, you're talking about women's empowerment, education, health, corruption. You're talking about so many different issues, which in the original G20 framework were not there. They were very, focused on the economic and financial and the role of banks, the role of fiscal responsibility, the role of capital flows. Today, in fact, the Bali Declaration is actually very interesting because it has a lot of developing country perspectives in it. Climate finance, helping the poorest of the poor, infrastructure financing, bridging the digital divide. These are all, kind of traditional developing country themes.
And the Troika, I think next year will be Indonesia, India, and South Africa, is it, or Brazil?
Brazil.
So three global South.
Three global South, yeah.
But is it good enough for India to be on the high table, so as to speak, in the G20? Is that just the badge? Is that badge good enough?
No, I think we systemically we are important. I mean, you're 3 trillion today, and all projections are you'll be going to 5 trillion. and you're fifth largest today in the world. In 2 years' time, you'll be the third largest. And given your population size, I think we are definitely much more than it's a question of a high table. I mean, we have solid contributions to make on every issue, whether it is climate, whether it is energy, whether it is food, whether it is health. I don't see any sector in which India does not matter. So the question only for us is going to be, you leave aside the politics, but how do you reorient under the Indian presidency and shape the G20 agenda? Are you going to focus on, I mean, you have to decide which areas to actually focus on and leave a stamp on the G20's future agenda. 1 year is too short, but the fact of the matter is that your entry into the G20, the fact that you were one of the G20 is all been vindicated by your performance in the past and the potential for your growth in the future. So we stand vindicated that yes, we are a natural choice and a partner in the G20.
Just want you to amplify again on one of the thoughts that you had spoken about earlier of China being the only country that had gained post 2008. Could you amplify a little bit on that and how the seriousness of that?
You know,
who all were complicit in the rise of China.
I don't know whether the complicit word is the correct word, but there is no doubt. I remember at that time, the Premier Wen Jiabao in one of the earlier summits, I don't remember, not 2009, 2010, with great delight, he said at one of the summits that the invisible hand of Adam Smith had died in 2008. Because they saw that as the collapse of capitalism and a vindication of the Chinese system, number one. Number two, they extracted maximum benefit from the international economic order. And I think and the Western economies have played a full role in the resurgence of the Chinese economy in terms of its manufacturing, in terms of technology, and they have contributed to the phenomenal rise of China as an economic power.
Master Pankaj Saran, as always, it's been great pleasure listening to you. Thank you for sharing both your experience and your expertise.
Thank you
both
so
with us
much.
and with our viewers.
Pleasure.
In fact, there's a comment that I'd like to take up on the screen here from Shivam Sahu, who says, awesome discussion.
Thank you. Thank you. I enjoyed it. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Master.
Thank you.
And thanks for all those viewers who joined this live stream. This is one of the few live streams that we do on location, so it's been a bit challenging. And I'd like to give a big shout out to my production team, including Manas Tarai, Karan, and Aryaman, as well as people back in the office. And thanks for watching. You can, of course, help support us. There's a UPI QR code that's there in the YouTube descriptor. This is The Talking Point on StratNews Global. I'm Amitabh.